the quiet between flames. The fire burned low, its glow stretching across the cabin floor like a fading memory. Shadows leaned against the log walls, shifting with each reluctant flicker, as though the room itself struggled to stay awake. Outside, the wind threaded through the trees, a restless whisper that never quite settled. Inside, silence reigned, not peaceful, but heavy like something waiting to be spoken and never was. Aiyana sat near the hearth, her hands resting idly in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined as if they had forgotten their purpose. The warmth brushed her skin, yet did not reach the quiet ache beneath her ribs. She watched the fire not for comfort, but for distraction. It gave her something to look at, something that responded, however faintly, to existence. Behind her, the cabin stretched in stillness. A wooden table stood untouched, a plate left where it had cooled hours ago. A chair remained slightly pulled back, as though someone had once intended to sit and then changed their mind. These small displacements lingered like echoes, subtle reminders of a presence that felt increasingly absent. Elias would return late again. The thought did not surprise her. It did not anger her either. It simply settled into place, as familiar and unremarkable as the worn floorboards beneath her feet. There had been a time when she counted the hours, when she listened for footsteps and held her breath at every distant sound. That time had long since passed. Now, she measured his absence not in minutes, but in the quiet routines that filled the space he left behind. She adjusted the front of her dress absent-mindedly, the soft fabric gathering beneath her fingers. The motion was small, habitual, yet it carried a trace of unease she could not name. Her gaze drifted toward the door, lingering there as if expecting something different, though she could not say what. The wind rose again, brushing against the cabin with a low, hollow sound. It made the walls creak, the faintest protest of wood against time. Aiyana exhaled slowly, her breath steady but shallow, as though she feared disturbing the fragile balance of the room. Then she heard it, a shift, soft, deliberate, and unmistakably human. Her head turned slightly, not abruptly, but with a cautious awareness. The sound had not come from within the cabin. It lingered just beyond, near enough to be real, distant enough to be uncertain. For a moment, she remained still, listening as the silence stretched thin around her. Nothing followed, and yet something had changed. Aiyana rose from her place by the fire, her movement careful, almost reluctant. The warmth fell away as she stepped forward, replaced by the cooler air that hovered near the door. Each step felt measured, as though she moved through more than space, through hesitation, through instinct, through the quiet rules she had lived by without question. Her hand hovered near the latch. She hesitated, not out of fear, but from a sensation she could not easily define. It was not curiosity alone, nor was it caution. It was something deeper, something that pressed gently against the boundaries of her routine, asking, quietly, persistently, to be acknowledged. Another faint sound reached her. Closer this time. Aiyana opened the door. The night air slipped inside at once, cool and immediate, carrying with it the scent of earth and distant smoke. The darkness beyond the threshold stretched wide, softened only by the pale wash of moonlight that filtered through the trees. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, a figure shifted at the edge of the clearing. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He simply stood there, his presence steady, as though he belonged to the stillness rather than disrupted it. The faint light traced the outline of his form, broad-shouldered, unmoving, yet undeniably aware. Aiyana felt her breath catch, not in fear, but in recognition of something unfamiliar and immediate. Her fingers tightened slightly against the doorframe, grounding her as she studied the figure without fully understanding why she did so. He remained silent. There was no threat in his stance, no urgency in his presence. And yet, he did not leave. The space between them held, a quiet tension, unspoken and unresolved. Aiyana lowered her gaze for a brief moment, the gesture instinctive, as though she had stepped into something she did not yet know how to face. When she looked again, he had shifted only slightly, enough to suggest awareness, not enough to break the stillness. Neither of them spoke. The fire behind her crackled softly, its warmth reaching toward the open door, as if reluctant to let her stand between two worlds. Inside lay the life she understood, predictable, silent, unchanging. Outside, something waited, not loudly, not insistently, but with a presence that felt impossible to ignore. Aiyana remained at the threshold, caught between the two, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a beginning, the space between words. The door remained open longer than it should have. Cool night air slipped past Aiyana, brushing against her skin in contrast to the fading warmth of the fire behind her. She did not move to close it. Instead, she stood at the threshold, her fingers resting lightly against the rough wood, her attention fixed on the man who had not yet stepped forward. He lingered at the edge of the clearing, his presence steady, neither retreating nor advancing. The stillness between them deepened, shaped not by fear, but by an unspoken awareness that neither seemed willing to break too quickly. Aiyana was the first to shift. She drew a breath, subtle but deliberate, and stepped just beyond the doorway. The ground beneath her feet felt cool, solid, real, an anchoring sensation that steadied the quiet unrest within her. She did not go far, only enough to meet the night halfway, as though testing whether it would receive her or push her back. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her movement without urgency. His expression remained unreadable in the dim light, yet there was no hostility in it. Only observation, only patience. "You shouldn't be here," she said at last, her voice soft but not uncertain. The words settled between them, not as a command, but as a fragile boundary, one she offered more out of habit than conviction. He considered her for a moment before responding. "I could say the same," he replied quietly. His voice was low, measured, carrying a calm that seemed at odds with the tension beneath the surface. It did not challenge her, yet it did not yield either. Aiyana felt the faintest stir of something she had not expected, an awareness of herself, sharpened by his gaze, as though she had been seen more clearly in this brief exchange than in the long, silent days that came before it. "You're near my home," she said, the words forming more slowly now. "That makes it different." "Does it?" he asked. The question lingered, simple yet disarming. It carried no accusation, no insistence, only the quiet suggestion that her certainty might not be as firm as she believed. Aiyana hesitated. For a moment, she searched for a response that would restore the balance she had known, something that would place this encounter neatly within the boundaries she understood. But nothing came. The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed gently against her, asking her to consider what she had never needed to question before. She lowered her gaze briefly, her fingers brushing against the fabric of her dress in a familiar, grounding motion. When she looked up again, his attention had not wavered. "You should go," she said, though the words lacked the quiet strength they had held before. He did not move. Instead, he stepped forward, only once, closing a small portion of the distance between them. The motion was controlled, deliberate, yet altered something fundamental in the space they shared. The line that had existed moments ago felt less certain now, less defined. "I will," he said, "but not because you told me to." There was no defiance in his tone, only clarity. It unsettled her more than resistance would have. Aiyana felt the shift within herself again, subtle but undeniable. It was not fear that held her still, nor was it curiosity alone. It was something quieter, something that unfolded gradually, like a thought she had not yet allowed herself to finish. "Why are you here?" she asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider it. He regarded her for a moment, as though weighing how much to reveal. "I saw the light," he said simply, "and I wondered who stayed awake when the night had already settled." The answer was not what she expected. It carried no intrusion, no hidden intent, only a quiet acknowledgement of the same stillness that had surrounded her for so long. "I always stay awake," she replied, almost without thinking. The admission surprised her. It felt too revealing, too honest, yet it lingered in the air between them, impossible to take back. He studied her more closely now, his expression shifting in a way she could not fully interpret. Not pity, not judgment, something closer to understanding. "That is a long time to be alone," he said. Aiyana's breath faltered just slightly. "I'm not alone," she answered quickly, though the words felt thinner than she intended. He did not argue. He did not need to. The silence that followed carried its own quiet contradiction. Behind her, the fire cracked softly, its light spilling through the open doorway, reaching toward them as though unwilling to let the moment drift too far into the dark. Aiyana became suddenly aware of the space she occupied, neither fully inside nor fully outside, suspended between what was known and what remained uncertain. She stepped back. The movement was small, but it restored a measure of distance, a fragile sense of order. "You should leave," she said again, more quietly now. This time he nodded. "I will," he replied. But he did not turn immediately. Instead, he held her gaze for a moment longer, as though committing something to memory. Not her face, but the moment itself, the space they had shared. Then, without another word, he stepped back into the darkness. The clearing swallowed him gradually, his form fading until only the outline remained, and then nothing at all. Aiyana stood there long after he was gone. The night felt different now. Not louder, not brighter, but altered in a way she could not easily define. The silence no longer pressed against her in the same way. It lingered, yes, but it carried something beneath it, something that stirred rather than settled. At last, she turned and stepped back inside. The door closed softly behind her, the latch falling into place with a quiet finality. The fire had burned lower, its glow dimmer now, yet it still reached toward her, offering the same familiar warmth. But as Aiyana returned to her place beside it, she realized that something within her had shifted. The stillness she had once known so well no longer felt complete, and though she could not yet name it, she understood one thing with quiet certainty. He would return. The weight of nearness. The fire had been rebuilt, but its warmth no longer felt the same. Aiyana sat close to the hearth, her hands extended toward the flames, though she scarcely noticed the heat against her skin. The cabin remained as it had always been, quiet, orderly, unchanged. Yet something within that stillness had shifted, as though a single moment had unsettled the balance she had come to depend on. She had not expected him to return, and yet she had not truly believed he would stay away. The thought lingered with her as the evening stretched on, threading through her movements, shaping the pauses between them. She found herself, listening more carefully, her attention drawn toward the spaces beyond the cabin walls. Every faint sound carried possibility. Every silence held the suggestion of interruption. It unsettled her. It awakened her. The door remained closed this time, the latch firmly in place, as though the simple act of securing it could restore the quiet certainty she had lost. But the boundary felt thinner now, less absolute. She had crossed it once, if only by a single step, and the memory of that moment refused to fade. Aiyana lowered her hands, pressing them together in her lap. Her fingers tightened slightly, as if bracing against something unseen. She told herself it would end there, that it had to. The thought formed clearly, with the quiet authority of habit, yet it lacked the weight it once carried. It did not settle into place. It hovered, uncertain, as though waiting to be challenged. A soft sound broke the stillness. Not distant this time. Close. Aiyana's breath caught before she could steady it. Her gaze lifted slowly toward the door, her posture rigid with a tension she could no longer deny. For a moment, she remained seated, as though stillness might preserve the fragile line she had drawn for herself. The sound came again, deliberate. She rose. Each step toward the door felt heavier than it should have, not from fear, but from the quiet understanding of what waited on the other side. Her hand hovered near the latch, her hesitation sharper now, edged with something more than uncertainty. It would be easier not to open it, easier to remain within the life she knew, to let the moment pass as though it had never begun. But the thought did not hold her. Instead, she lifted the latch and opened the door. The night greeted her once more, cool and still, the faint glow of the moon tracing the outline of the clearing. And there, as though no time had passed at all, he stood. Takoda. He had come closer this time, not at the edge of the clearing, not half hidden by shadow, but within the open space where the firelight could reach him. It softened the lines of his form, casting a quiet glow against his features, though his expression remained composed, unreadable. "You returned," Aiyana said, her voice quieter than she intended. It was not a question. "I said I would leave," he replied. "I did not say I would stay gone." The answer carried a calm certainty that unsettled her more than it should have. It suggested a presence not bound by her expectations, not shaped by the quiet rules she had tried to impose. "You shouldn't be here," she said again, though the words felt weaker now, worn thin by repetition. "And yet," he said, "you opened the door." Aiyana felt the truth of it settle heavily within her. She had no answer for it, no simple denial that could undo what had already been done. The silence stretched between them, but it no longer felt empty. It held something else now, something charged, something waiting. Takoda took another step forward. The distance between them narrowed, subtle yet undeniable. Aiyana did not retreat this time. She remained where she was, though her breath had grown shallow, her pulse unsteady beneath the quiet control she struggled to maintain. "You are not afraid," he observed. It was not a question. Aiyana held his gaze, though it required more effort than she wished to admit. "No," she said softly, but the word carried complexity, uncertainty, awareness, something deeper than fear. Takoda studied her for a moment, as though searching for the truth beneath her answer. "Then what holds you here?" he asked. The question lingered, its simplicity cutting through the fragile defenses she had built. Aiyana's gaze faltered, lowering briefly as her fingers tightened against the fabric of her dress. She could not answer him, not fully, not honestly, not without acknowledging something she had not yet allowed herself to name. "I don't know," she admitted at last. The words felt heavier than any she had spoken before. Takoda did not respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer still until only a small space remained between them. The warmth of the fire reached them both now, softening the cool edge of the night, drawing them into a shared stillness that felt both unfamiliar and inevitable. Aiyana became acutely aware of everything: the sound of her breath, the subtle shift of his presence, the fragile line that had nearly vanished between them. "You should go," she said again, though her voice had softened into something almost unrecognizable. This time, the words did not carry dismissal. They carried doubt. Takoda's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding, yet not without restraint. "If I leave," he said quietly, "will you close the door?" The question struck deeper than she expected. Aiyana hesitated. Behind her, the fire flickered, its light wavering as though caught in the same uncertainty that held her still. Before her, the night stretched open, vast, and uncontained. She stood between them once more, but the space felt different now. Not a boundary, a choice. Her fingers loosened against the doorframe as she lifted her gaze to meet his again. The silence that followed was no longer fragile. It carried weight, intention, consequence. And for the first time, Aiyana did not step back. The door remained open, and neither of them moved to close it. What remains in the ashes? Morning arrived without warmth. A pale, indifferent light filtered through the narrow window, settling across the cabin in quiet contrast to the fire that had long since burned low. What remained in the hearth was no longer flame, but ash, soft, gray, and still. It carried no movement, no promise, only the faint memory of what had once lived there. Aiyana stood near the window, her arms drawn loosely around herself, as though the stillness of the room had settled into her bones. She had not slept. The night had passed in fragments, moments of silence, broken thoughts, and the persistent awareness of something that could not be undone. Behind her, the cabin bore no sign of what had changed. The table remained in place. The chair still stood, slightly askew. The door was closed, its latch secured as it had always been. Nothing had shifted, and yet everything felt altered in a way that resisted explanation. She exhaled slowly, her breath steady but heavy, as though it carried more than air. The memory of the night lingered, not in clear images but in sensations. The quiet nearness, the absence of distance, the moment when restraint had faltered, not in a sudden break, but in a gradual surrender she had neither stopped nor fully understood. Aiyana closed her eyes briefly. She did not search for justification. She did not attempt to reshape what had happened into something simpler or less consequential. The truth remained as it was, unspoken, undeniable, and now woven into the silence that surrounded her. A faint sound drew her attention. The door. It opened with a measured creak, deliberate and familiar. Aiyana did not turn immediately. She recognized the rhythm of it, the weight of the step that followed, the quiet authority it carried. Elias had returned. "You're awake," he said, his voice even, unchanged. It held no warmth, but it held no suspicion either. It was the same tone he had always used, steady and distant, as though each word existed only to fill the necessary space between silence. Aiyana lowered her arms, her posture straightening as she faced the window a moment longer before turning. "Yes," she replied softly. Elias stepped further into the room, removing his gloves with slow precision. His movements were deliberate, controlled, untouched by the subtle disarray that lived beneath the surface of the moment. He set the gloves aside, his gaze passing briefly over the room, taking in what was visible and nothing more. "You should rest," he said. "You look tired." The observation landed without weight, not unkind, but not concerned. It was an acknowledgement, nothing more. "I'm fine," Aiyana answered. The words came easily, shaped by habit rather than truth. Elias nodded once, accepting the response without question. He moved past her, his attention already shifting elsewhere, as though the conversation had reached its natural end. The space between them remained intact, unchanged, unchallenged, and untouched by what lay beneath it. Aiyana watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. There had been a time when she searched his presence for something more, for warmth, for connection, for any sign that the distance between them might close. Now, she saw it clearly for what it was, a life defined not by absence, but by quiet separation, and she had stepped beyond it. The realization did not arrive with sudden force. It settled gradually, with the same quiet certainty that had shaped the night before. There was no undoing it, no returning to the unawareness that had once made the silence bearable. Elias moved toward the table, his back to her now, his attention fixed on the ordinary tasks that filled his days. "I'll be gone again before dusk," he said. "There's work that needs tending." Aiyana listened, her gaze steady, her thoughts distant. "Of course," she replied. The answer required nothing more. He did not turn. He did not pause. The routine remained intact, unbroken by the subtle shift that had altered everything for her alone. Aiyana lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table as she stepped back. The cabin felt smaller now, its walls closer, its silence heavier. It no longer held the same quiet acceptance it once had. It pressed against her, reminding her of what it contained and what it lacked. Outside, the wind stirred again, softer now, carrying the faint rustle of movement through the trees. Aiyana's attention drifted toward the door. She did not move toward it. Not yet, but the awareness remained, steady and undeniable. The boundary she had once believed in had already been crossed. What lay beyond it was no longer distant, no longer unknown. It waited, not with urgency, not with demand, but with presence. Aiyana drew a slow breath, her posture still, her expression composed. Behind her, Elias continued his quiet routine, unchanged and unaware. Before her, the door stood closed, its surface plain, unremarkable, yet no longer absolute. She understood now that the choice had not ended with the night. It had only begun, and as the silence settled once more around her, it carried something new, not emptiness, Not comfort, but the quiet, persistent question of what she would do next. The fire in the hearth shifted faintly, a single ember stirring beneath the ash. Not gone, only waiting.